My name is Jason, and for about 8 months during my junior year of college, I worked the graveyard shift at a self-storage facility. It was called Store It All, a sprawling, single-story complex on the industrial edge of town. It wasn't a bad gig, really. The pay was decent, and for 90% of the night, I was completely alone in a heated office with free Wi-Fi. It was the perfect setup for a student who needed to get paid to study. The layout was simple. There was the main office, a small, prefabricated building that sat just inside the main automatic gate. The rest of the property was a grid of long metal buildings divided into rows. Row A, Row B, Row C, and so on all the way to Row F. A gravel perimeter road circled the entire property, and a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire marked the boundary. My job was to sit in the office, watch a bank of 12 grainy black and white security monitors, and do 2 full patrols of the property, one at 2 a.m. and one at 4 a.m. The nights were almost always identical. I'd relieve the evening manager, Dave, at 10 p.m. He'd give me a rundown, "All quiet, man, don't fall asleep," and then I'd be alone. The silence was the first thing you noticed. It was heavy, broken only by the hum of the office computer, the buzz of the fluorescent light above my desk, and the click-thwack of the big industrial wall clock. This particular night in November started just like any other. It was cold and a thin, icy rain was misting the air. I had a 500-page textbook on abnormal psychology open on the desk, a lukewarm coffee at my elbow. I was lost in a chapter about cognitive dissonance when the phone on the desk rang. I jumped. It never rang. I looked at the clock, 1:17 a.m. I picked up the receiver. Store It All, Jason speaking. There was nothing. Just dead air. Not even a hiss. "Hello," I said again. I waited. Maybe it was a bad connection. Then I heard a sound. A faint, rhythmic click. It wasn't like a button being pressed. It was smaller. Like someone idly tapping a fingernail against the mouthpiece of their own phone. Click, click, click. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice a little firmer. The clicking stopped. I heard a single, soft exhale of breath, and then the line went dead. I stared at the phone. It was probably just a missed dial, someone who didn't realize they'd even called. But the exhale, that was unnerving. I tried to shake it off and went back to my book, but the words wouldn't focus. My eyes kept drifting up to the monitor bank. All 12 screens showed what they always showed, static-laced images of empty, rain-slicked corridors. Camera 1 showed the front gate. Camera 12 showed the back fence line, and the cameras in between covered the rows. Camera 7 was focused on the long, dark hallway of Row B. Everything was still. I told myself it was just the late hour and the caffeine making me jumpy. At 2 a.m. my alarm buzzed. Time for the first patrol. I grabbed the heavy Maglite-style flashlight, pulled my hood up, and stepped out into the cold. The air smelled like wet pavement and dust. I locked the office door behind me and started my walk. Row A was fine. The big metal roll-up doors were all secured. The only sound was the crunch of my own boots on the gravel. I walked the full length, checked the back fence, all secure, and rounded the corner to Row B. This was the longest row and the most poorly lit. Halfway down, one of the overhead sodium lights was out, plunging the middle section into deep shadow. As I got closer, I shined my light down the corridor, and I saw something. Right in the middle of the pavement, directly under the broken light, was a small wooden toy soldier. I stopped. I crouched down and picked it up. It was old, hand-painted. Its red coat was chipped, and one of its tiny black-painted boots was missing. It was standing perfectly upright, as if someone had placed it there for me to find. I scanned the darkness. "Hello." My voice sounded small. Nothing. Just the endless rows of locked doors. This wasn't just weird. This was wrong. This facility was secured. The gate hadn't been opened since Dave left at 10. No one could have gotten in. I shined my light on the doors. 7B, 9B, 11B, all locked. I put the toy in my jacket pocket, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I finished the patrol quickly, my head on a swivel, my heart hammering. I skipped the rest of the rows and made a beeline back to the office, locking the door firmly behind me. I sat at the desk, breathing hard. I took the soldier out of my pocket and set it on the desk, next to my keyboard. It stared at me with its blank, painted-on eyes. I tried to rationalize it. A customer must have dropped it earlier in the day. Dave must have missed it. A gust of wind must have blown it upright? No, it was placed. I forced myself to look at the monitors. I scanned them one by one. Gate, Row A, Row C. Everything was still. I got to camera 7, the one for Row B. The screen was just static. A loud, hissing, snowstorm static. My blood ran cold. It was fine 10 minutes ago. I fiddled with the controls, turning the knob. The static just got worse. Had the rain finally killed the connection? As I was watching the snow on the screen, a new sound came through the small, crackly speaker built into the monitor console. There was an intercom system, but I never used it. It was always on, carrying the ambient sounds from each row. From camera 7's speaker, I heard a sound under the static. It was a scrape. A long, slow scrape of metal on concrete. It was coming from row B, from the source of the static. I froze. I listened. It came again. Scrape, rattle, scrape. Like someone was dragging a metal chair. Or a metal roll-up door. I grabbed the desk phone and checked the computer log. Unit 7B, I muttered. I typed it in. The record popped up. Rented by a J. Smith. Account paid in full in cash for 6 months. No other details. The scraping stopped. I sat there in the buzzing silence of the office for what felt like an eternity. The toy soldier stared at me. The static on camera 7 hissed. Then, at 2:43 a.m., the monitor for camera 1, the front gate, buzzed. I snapped my attention to it. A figure. A person standing just outside the gate in the rain, staring at the office. They were wearing a dark raincoat, the hood pulled so low I couldn't see a face. They were just standing, perfectly still. "No way," I whispered. I grabbed the phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed the non-emergency police line. "Hi, I'm the night guard at the store at all on Industrial Drive. I have a prowler. Someone is standing outside my front gate." The dispatcher sounded bored. "Are they trying to gain entry, sir?" "No, they're just watching me. We can send a car to patrol the area, but it might be 20-30 minutes. Are you secure in the office?" "Yes," I said. "Thank you." I hung up. I looked back at the monitor. The figure was gone. A wave of relief washed over me. Maybe they saw me on the phone. Maybe they got spooked. Then I looked at the other monitors. Camera 2, row A, camera 3, row A, camera 4, row C. I scanned them all. Nothing. I went back to camera 7. Still static. And then I saw it. On camera 12, the one covering the back fence. The figure. They weren't outside the gate. They were inside. They were at the back of the property, standing near the fence line. How had they gotten there so fast? I zoomed in. The image was grainy, but I could see them clearly. They were standing with their back to the camera, facing the fence. As I watched, they slowly turned around. They turned and they seemed to look right at the camera, right at me. They were too far away to see a face, just a pale, dark blur under the hood. Then they waved. A slow, deliberate lift of the hand. I physically recoiled, knocking my chair back. This wasn't a prank. This was something else. I watched, terrified, as the figure started to walk. They walked out of camera 12's view. I scanned. Camera 11, nothing. Camera 10, nothing. Camera 9, row D, nothing. Camera 8, row C, there. The figure. Walking, not running. Just a steady, calm pace. Walking toward the office. I was paralyzed. Camera 8, gone. Camera 7, static. Camera 6, row B, the other end. There, closer. Camera 5, row A, closer. They were coming. I ducked down behind the desk, fumbling for my cell phone to call 911. The office was dead quiet. Someone was tapping on the office door. I put my hand over my mouth to stifle my breathing. My heart felt like it was going to burst. It was a light, almost polite tapping. Like the toy soldier, a click, click, click on the glass. Silence. I waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Then the sound of a key sliding into the lock. Jiggle, rattle, click. The lock unlocked. My blood turned to ice. Oh, only Dave and I had keys. The door opened with a soft whoosh. The smell of rain and wet leaves filled the office. I was wedged under the desk, behind the modesty panel. I could see the floor. A pair of waterlogged work boots stepped inside. The person didn't say anything. They walked past the desk. I could hear their raincoat hissing as they moved. They stopped in front of the monitor bank. I held my breath. I was shaking so hard I was afraid I'd rattle the desk. They stood there watching the screens, watching the empty rows, watching the static on camera 7. Then they turned. They faced the desk. They faced me. They stood there for an agonizingly long time. My cell phone, which I'd left on the desk in my panic, buzzed with a text message. It was the police, and automated text. Officer dispatched. ETA 5 minutes. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. The figure lunged. Not at me, but at the phone. A hand shot out, grabbed the phone from the desk. And in that moment, as they leaned over, I saw them. Under the hood, it wasn't a face. It was a mask. A smooth, white porcelain mask. Like a mannequin's face. Blank, expressionless, with 2 black holes for eyes. It looked down at the phone. And then, it looked down at me. I didn't think. I reacted. I kicked the rolling desk chair as hard as I could. It slammed into the figure's legs. They stumbled back with a grunt. I scrambled out from under the desk and bolted for the door. I ran out into the rain, screaming. I didn't run for the gate. I knew I wouldn't make it. I ran into the maze. I sprinted down row C, the echo of my own footsteps chasing me. I looked back. The figure was standing in the doorway of the office, silhouetted against the light, watching me. I ducked into an empty unit, one I knew had a broken latch. Unit 12C. I slipped inside into the pitch-black, dusty space and pulled the metal door almost shut, leaving just a tiny crack. I stood in the darkness, my back pressed to the cold corrugated metal. My breathing was ragged, and then I heard it, whistling. A high, thin, tuneless whistle echoing through the facility, and footsteps, not running, just a calm, steady crunch, crunch, crunch on the gravel. They were walking down my row. Crunch, crunch. The whistling got louder. They were outside my unit. The footsteps stopped. I could see a shadow through the crack. They were standing right in front of my door. I was going to die. They were going to pull that door open. I squeezed my eyes shut. Suddenly, the whole facility was washed in blue and red light. A car horn blared. WHUP, WHUP, WHUP. The police cruiser. It was at the front gate, its spotlight sweeping the rows. I looked through the crack. The shadow was gone. I didn't see them run. I didn't hear a sound. They just vanished. I stayed in that unit until I heard the police officer calling my name. They swept the whole place. They found nothing. No one. They found the copy of the manager's key on the floor of the office. They found the static on camera 7 was being caused by the wire being pulled from inside Unit 7B. They cut the lock. The unit was empty. Not someone moved out empty. Never been rented empty. Dust, cobwebs. No J. Smith file existed in the system. The lock I'd seen on it was a dummy glued to the latch. The worst part? The last thing they found. The police officer asked me what I was holding. I opened my hand. I'd been clutching it so hard it had dug into my palm. It was the little toy soldier. But I had left it on the desk. I know I did. I quit the next morning. I dropped the class I was studying for. I never went back. I still have no idea who that person was or what they wanted. But I know one thing. They had been in Unit 7B for a long, long time, watching the camera feed of me in the office, waiting. 6 long, cold months, I worked as a night watchman at a massive granite quarry. This wasn't a job I wanted, it was a job I needed. My unemployment had run out and my office was a 10 by 10 prefabricated shack on a bluff overlooking the enormous, man-made canyon. My job was simple. From 8 p.m. to 6 a.m., I was to make sure no one, usually teenagers looking for a place to drink or swim, trespassed onto the property. I was also there to prevent the theft of equipment, which always struck me as absurd. Who was going to steal a 90-ton front loader? The isolation was absolute. The quarry was miles down a poorly maintained access road. My only companions were the wind, which screamed over the edge of the pit, and the coyotes, whose yips and howls sounded unnervingly close. The pit itself was the main feature. It was a vast, terrifying blackness, a square-mile hole of perfect, unnatural shadow. My shack had a single powerful spotlight on its roof, which I was supposed to keep aimed at the primary digging site hundreds of feet below. My routine was simple. I'd arrive, fire up the generator that powered the shack in the light, and settle in. I had a small electric heater, a two-way radio to a supervisor who was never awake, and a stack of old paperback novels. Once at midnight, I had to do a patrol. This involved walking what they called the Watchman's Path, a gravel road that circled the entire perimeter of the pit. It took about an hour, and I hated every second of it. This night in January was clear and brutally cold. The stars looked like chips of ice. I'd been in the shack for a few hours, reading the same page of a book over and over, when the main spotlight on the roof shut off. The shack was plunged into darkness, save for the weak glow of my heater. The generator was still humming. I sighed, grabbed my flashlight. The breaker box was on the outside of the shack. I stepped out into the wind, which immediately stole my breath. I opened the metal box. The main breaker for the spotlight was flipped. "That's weird," I muttered. I flipped it back on. The spotlight hummed, flickered, and then flooded the pit with harsh white light. I could see the massive yellow-painted machines down there, sleeping like giant, dead insects. I went back inside, poured a cup of sludgy coffee from my thermos, and sat down. It was 11:30 p.m. At midnight, my alarm went off. Time for the patrol. I bundled up, grabbed my heavy flashlight, and started the long walk. The gravel crunched loudly under my boots. The silence of the quarry was profound. You could hear the distant hiss of the highway miles away. I was halfway around on the far side of the pit when I heard something. It was talking. Faint, garbled like a radio broadcast. I stopped. The sound was coming from a cluster of parked equipment. A few dump trucks, an excavator. I was instantly on edge. This was exactly what I was here to prevent. "Hey," I yelled, my voice sounding weak against the open space. "This is private property. You need to leave now." The talking stopped. I advanced slowly, my flashlight beam cutting the dark. "I'm calling the sheriff." I reached the excavator. I shined my light up into the cab. Sitting on the operator's seat was a small, black, battery-powered walkie-talkie. It crackled. Just static. I climbed up onto the massive tread and grabbed it. It was cheap like a kid's toy. I fumbled for the off switch and the static died. Kids. It had to be. They were probably hiding somewhere watching me, laughing. They must have dropped it running when I yelled. "Idiots," I grumbled, but I was shaking. I clipped the walkie-talkie to my belt. I'd turn it in to the foreman in the morning. I finished my patrol, scanning the shadows, seeing a trespasser in every piece of machinery. I got back to the shack at 1 a.m., locked the door, and breathed a sigh of relief. I sat down trying to calm my nerves. At 1:47 a.m., the spotlight went out again. This time I was angry. "You gotta be kidding me." I stormed outside to the breaker. It wasn't flipped. I looked up at the light on the roof. The wind was howling. I shined my flashlight beam up at the massive bulb. It was shattered. Not burned out. Not cracked. Shattered. Like someone had taken a baseball bat to it. I stood there frozen. There was no way the wind did that. There was no way I did that. Then ping. A sound from the side of the shack. Like a small pebble hitting the metal siding. I ducked, shining my light into the darkness. Nothing. What? A bigger rock this time. It hit the wall right next to my head. I scrambled back inside the shack and slammed the door, fumbling with the deadbolt. I was breathing hard. This wasn't kids. Or if it was, they were not scared of me. I went to the two-way radio. "This is Unit 1 at the quarry. Does anyone copy? I have trespassers on site. They're hostile." Static. I tried again. Nothing. I grabbed my cell phone. No service. The cell tower was too far away, blocked by the quarry walls. I was cut off. I sat in the dark, my only light the red glow of the heater. I was terrified. I just had to wait until 6 a.m. 5 more hours. Then the walkie-talkie on my belt crackled to life. I yelped, nearly dropping it. I hadn't turned it off. I'd hit the wrong button. A voice, low and whispering, came through the speaker. "Hey," it hissed. "Come on out. We just want to see the big trucks." My blood turned to ice. It was a man's voice, deep and guttural. "We know you're in there, little watchman." I threw the walkie-talkie across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor. "Not nice," the voice crackled. "We've been watching you for a week. You always walk the same path. You always leave your door unlocked when you go to the breaker." My head was spinning. Then I saw it. On my desk next to my thermos. My own walkie-talkie. The one that was supposed to be tuned to my supervisor. The one I'd found on the excavator. It wasn't a transmitter. It was a receiver. They hadn't dropped it. They planted it. The one on my desk. That was theirs. They had swapped them. They had been listening to me. To my breathing. To my call for help. To my phone call to my supervisor last night when I told him the radio was on the fritz. I heard a new sound. A scrape. From the roof. They were on the roof of the shack. Scrape, thud, scrape. They were trying to get in. Maybe the small ventilation hatch. I looked around, frantic. There was no weapon. Just a flashlight and a thermos. The voice crackled again, this time from the walkie-talkie on the floor. "We cut the phone line to the main gate, watchman. No one is coming. The generator is next." That was it. I wasn't going to be trapped in a box. I grabbed my heavy flashlight, unbolted the door, and burst out. I ran not toward the gate, they'd be waiting, but toward my truck, an old Ford Ranger parked 50 feet away. I saw them. 3 of them. Not kids. Full-grown men dressed in dark, heavy work clothes. They were silhouetted against the stars, standing by the generator. They didn't chase me. They just turned and watched. I got to my truck, my fingers raw as I fumbled for my keys. I jammed the key in the lock, tore the door open, and dove in. I hit the door lock and jammed the key in the ignition. Click, 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 click. The battery was dead. I looked at the dashboard. The dome light. I'd left the door ajar. All night. The battery was completely, totally dead. I hammered the steering wheel. Stupid. Stupid. The 3 men started walking toward me. Not running. Just a slow, casual walk. They were fanning out, a half circle, blocking any path back to the main road. I had one choice. I got out of the truck and ran. I ran away from them, back toward the shack, and then I veered right, sprinting for the edge of the pit. "Where you going, watchman?" one of them yelled. He laughed. I ran down the steep gravel access ramp, the one the big trucks used. I was running into the pit, into the total, oppressive blackness. My flashlight beam was swallowed by the dark. I scrambled, half falling, down the slope. I got to the bottom, the pit floor. It was a maze of cut granite blocks, some as big as a house, and giant, sleeping machinery. I hid. I found a small space between a massive, six-wheeled dump truck and a stack of granite slabs. I wedged myself in, turned off my light, and listened. I could hear them. They were coming down the ramp. Crunch, crunch, and they were whistling. 3 different tones, like they were signaling each other, triangulating. One of them walked right by my hiding spot. I could smell cigarette smoke and stale beer. I held my breath, pushing myself so far back against the cold granite my bones ached. He passed. I waited. For what felt like an hour. The whistling faded. The footsteps receded. Silence. Had they given up? Then I heard an engine. An engine I knew. My truck. My heart sank. The spare key. I keep a spare key in a magnetic box in the wheel well. They knew. I peeked out from my hiding spot. High above, on the bluff, I saw the headlights of my Ranger. They'd gotten it started. Probably a jump pack. They weren't leaving. I watched, horrified, as the headlights moved. They drove straight at the shack. "No," I whispered. The truck accelerated. There was a sound like a bomb going off. A crunch of metal and wood. They drove my truck through the shack. I saw it plow right through the small building, knocking it off its foundation. It rolled once and disappeared over the edge of the bluff, crashing down into the rocks just below. The truck's headlights swerved, turned, and then headed back up the access road. I heard them laughing and whooping as they drove away. I stayed in that pit until the first gray light of dawn touched the sky. I was half frozen. I climbed out, my whole body shaking. The shack was gone. Just a pile of splinters and torn metal. My radio, my books, my thermos, all gone. My truck was totaled, nose down in the rocks. I walked the 5 miles to the highway. When the police came, they found the shattered spotlight and the tire tracks. But they found no one. My boss, a man named Miller, met me there. He looked at the truck, at the shack, at me. He thought I'd done it. He thought I'd fallen asleep or been drunk and driven my truck into the shack. He fired me on the spot for gross negligence. They never found the walkie-talkies. They never found the men. They weren't trying to steal anything. They weren't kids. They were just bored. And they'd found a toy to play with. This job was supposed to be a piece of cake. I was hired by a development company that was converting a massive 19th century textile mill into high-end artist lofts. The place was colossal, a 6-story red brick monolith that took up an entire city block. My job was specifically to be a presence, to stop graffiti artists or homeless people from getting in. The project was being done in phases. The first and second floors were completely finished. Drywall, polished concrete floors, stainless steel appliances in the demo units. They were sterile, clean, and brightly lit. Floors 3, 4, and 5, however, were untouched. They were derelict. The developers gave me a tour on my first night. The door to the 3rd floor stairwell was secured with a heavy-duty chain and a thick brass padlock. "No one goes up there," the supervisor told me. "Not even you. The floors aren't sound. It's a total liability. Your only job is to patrol floors 1 and 2 and watch this lobby." My desk was a cheap folding card table in the new glass-walled lobby. It was a boring job, and for the first 2 weeks, absolutely nothing happened. I'd do my patrol at 11 p.m., 1 a.m., and 3 a.m., walk the empty, identical hallways of the finished floors, and then go back to my phone. The creepiness didn't start until I got curious. I wanted to know what was up there. I asked the day shift foreman. He laughed. "It's a time capsule," he said. "The mill went bankrupt in the 1950s. Then, in the 70s, a department store bought it for warehouse space. They went under too. It's been empty ever since. It's just junk." That night, the job started to feel different. The building was old. The new parts felt wrong, like a thin skin stretched over something ancient and rotting. It was about 12:45 a.m., and I was doing my second patrol. I was on the 2nd floor, the highest of the safe floors. It was dead silent. I was walking down the main corridor when I heard a sound. A loud thud. It came from directly above my head. On the 3rd floor. I stopped. The building was always making noise, settling, groaning, pipes knocking. But this was different. This wasn't a pipe. This was a thud, like something heavy had been dropped. I went to the stairwell. I looked up at the door to the 3rd floor. The chain was in place. The padlock was secure. I listened. Nothing. It must have been the building. I told myself that. It had to be. I went back down to the lobby. My desk had a small monitor that showed the feeds from the 4 cameras they'd installed. One on the lobby, one on the back entrance, and one on each of the finished hallways. I was watching the monitor, trying to read a comic on my phone, when I saw something that made my heart stop. On the monitor for the second floor hallway, the one I had just been in, a light flickered. It wasn't the overhead lights. It was a moving light, faint bobbing, like a flashlight. It appeared at the far end of the hall, swept across the walls, and then vanished. My hands were shaking. I grabbed my flashlight. "This is security," I yelled, my voice cracking in the empty lobby. "This is private property." I took the stairs 2 at a time. I got to the second floor. The hallway was empty, dark. "I've called the police," I lied. "You need to leave now." I heard a sound, a scrape, from the stairwell. I shined my light up the stairs. The door to the 3rd floor was open, not wide open, just ajar. A 6-inch crack of perfect blackness. The chain was undone. The padlock was hanging open, swaying slightly. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." My supervisor's voice was in my head. "Do not engage. Do not go up there." But they had my only exit blocked. If they came down, I had to see who was up there. I had to know what I was dealing with. I pulled my heavy flashlight from my belt. I walked up the stairs slowly. My heart felt like it was in my throat. I pushed the heavy, metal-clad door open. It groaned loudly. The smell hit me first. It was a heavy, thick smell of rot, damp plaster, and oil, like old cold machine oil. I stepped out onto the 3rd floor. The foreman was right. It was a time capsule. It was a vast, open space the size of a football field. A forest of concrete pillars held up the ceiling 20 feet above, and it was filled with machines. Dozens of them. Old, cast-iron textile looms standing in silent rows. Most were covered in thick, dusty tarps, making them look like a lumpy, sleeping herd of animals. And the mannequins. In a far corner, there was a pile of them from the department store days. A tangled mess of pale, plastic limbs and blank, smiling faces. "Hello," I called out. My voice was absorbed by the sheer size of the room. "Security, you need to leave." I heard a sound. A whirring. Click, clack. I shined my light toward the sound. One of the looms, in the center of the room. Its main drive wheel was turning, slowly. Clack, or. It was impossible. The power was cut. I walked toward it, my light bouncing. "Who's there?" I reached the machine. It was caked in rust and dust, but the wheel was definitely turning. I heard a scrape behind me. I spun around, shining my light. I was pointing it at the pile of mannequins. Except, they weren't in a pile anymore. They were standing. Maybe 20 of them. Standing in a loose semicircle, all facing me. Their blank, chipped faces. Their 1970s-era clothes, faded and rotting. Their stupid, painted-on smiles. "Very funny," I stammered, my voice trembling. This isn't funny." I started backing away. I must have missed them when I came in. The foreman's buddies were playing a prank. A sick, elaborate prank. I shined my light on one of them. A female mannequin in a yellow polyester dress. Its arm was raised as if waving. I knew it. I'd seen that one. Its arm was at its side before. I know it was. "I'm leaving," I yelled. "I'm calling the cops." I turned to run back to the stairwell, and I was face to face with one of them. It was standing right behind me, silent. It wasn't a mannequin. It was a person. At least I think it was. They were tall, thin, and wearing the tattered, greasy overalls of a 1950s mill worker. But their face, it was a smooth porcelain mask just like the mannequins. No expression, just 2 black, staring eye holes. In its hand, it held a heavy iron spindle, sharp and pointed. I screamed. I shoved it hard. It didn't budge. It was like shoving a statue. It raised the spindle. I didn't shove again. I ducked. I dove to the side, rolling on the dusty floor. I scrambled to my feet and ran. And I heard it. The sound of multiple footsteps. Not one. Dozens. A clattering, scraping, shambling sound. I looked back. They were all moving. The mannequins. The people dressed as mannequins. They were coming. Stiff-legged, jerky, but fast. Clambering over the looms, their porcelain faces all pointed at me. I sprinted for the stairwell. I burst through the door, my shoulder hitting the frame. I heard them slam against the other side of the door, a chorus of thuds. I fumbled with the chain, my hands slick with sweat. I looped it through the handles. A hand, a pale, white, plastic-looking hand, shot through the crack, grasping for me. I yelled and kicked it. I got the padlock through the chain and snapped it shut. I didn't wait. I ran. I ran down the stairs, past the second floor, past the first, out the lobby doors, and into the street. I didn't stop running for 3 blocks. I called 911 from a payphone. The police arrived, 2 cars. The babbling, terrified security guard tried to explain. They looked at me like I was insane, but they went in. I waited in the cruiser. 20 minutes later, they came out. "Son," the older officer said, "you need to calm down. You saw them." I said, "We saw nothing," he said. "The chain on that door is locked. Rusted shut, looks like. Hasn't been opened in years." "No," I said. "That's not possible. I was just up there. The lock." "There's nothing up there," he said. "Just a bunch of dust and old machines. And a pile of broken mannequins." He paused. "But we did find one thing." He held up an evidence bag. Inside was a single hand-painted wooden toy soldier. "We found this," he said, "sitting on the stairwell." "This yours?" I couldn't speak. It was the wait. No, that was my other job. The storage facility. My mind was reeling. I hadn't thought about that job in years. I must have looked insane. "No," I finally said. "It's not mine." The officer shrugged. "Well, whatever you saw, it's gone. We did find something, though. A ventilation panel in a shaft on the 3rd floor. Leads to the roof of the next building over. There's a nest. Blankets, food wrappers. Squatters. The mannequins." I whispered. "Just a prank, son," he said. "They must have known the building, come in from the roof, dressed up, tried to scare you. And they did a hell of a job. They're long gone now." He was wrong. I knew he was wrong. It wasn't a prank. The way they moved, the sound they made, and the toy soldier. I never worked at a storage facility. That wasn't my memory. It was theirs. They were showing me. I quit that night. I moved to a different city a week later. Sometimes when I see a mannequin in a store window, I have to cross the street. I can still smell the oil, and I can still hear that sound. Clack or. I took a job as a night security guard at my university's medical sciences building. I was a pre-med student and the job paid well. It was quiet, and like most campus security gigs, it was mostly about being a visible deterrent. The building was new, a high-tech temple of glass and steel. It was sterile, silent, and brightly lit, except for the basement. The basement was the one part of the old building they hadn't torn down. It was a concrete bunker, and it held the anatomy lab, the cadaver lab. I hated the basement. My patrol route was simple. Every 2 hours, I'd walk all 4 floors of the new building, then I'd take the elevator down to the basement, walk the short, flickering hallway, and check the lock on the anatomy lab door. I was one of 3 people with a key, me, the lab proctor, and the head of the department. The smell was the worst part. Even in the hallway, the faint, sweet, chemical smell of formaldehyde clung to the air. It was the smell of preservation. This night was a Tuesday, deep in the winter. Snow was falling outside, muffling the whole campus. It was 1 a.m., time for my first full patrol. The upper floors were fine. Empty classrooms, dark lecture halls. I took the glass elevator down to the basement. The doors opened with a ding. The basement hallway was a stark contrast. The lights were old fluorescents, and one of them was dying, buzzing and flickering like a strobe. I walked down the hall, my footsteps echoing. I reached the lab. It was a heavy, windowless, stainless steel door. As I got close, the motion sensor light inside the lab clicked on. I saw the light spill from under the door. I froze. I was the only person in the building. I had checked the sign-in sheet. No late-night study sessions. No one. "Hello?" I called out. Silence. The light stayed on. Maybe a rat? A large insect? The sensors were notoriously finicky, but I had to check. It was my job. My hand was shaking as I put the key in the lock. I turned it and pushed the heavy door open. "Security," I said, my voice trying to be firm. The light was blinding. The room was sterile, all white tile and stainless steel. In the center were the 8 long steel tables. Each one was covered by a standard issue, blue vinyl tarp. The room was empty. I stepped inside. The smell of formaldehyde was overwhelming. It made my eyes water. "Hello," I said again. I walked the perimeter. The walls were lined with specimen jars. Brains, organs floating in yellow fluid. At the far end was the walk-in cold storage and the door to the incinerator chute. I checked the window. It was high on the wall, but it was sealed and painted shut. Nothing. Not a thing. It had to be a faulty sensor. I backed out of the lab, pulling the heavy door shut. It clicked and locked automatically. I stood in the flickering hallway, watching the crack under the door. 3 seconds later, click, the light went out. A shiver went down my spine. I went back to the atrium, back to my desk, and tried to study, but I couldn't. I just stared at the elevator, thinking about that light. At 2 a.m. I heard a sound, a soft ding. The service elevator. The old freight elevator at the other end of the atrium. The one that also went to the basement. I looked at the indicator panel above it. The light for B was on. Then, the change. The light for G, ground, lit up. It was coming up. I stood up, my heart pounding. Maybe it was a janitor I didn't know about. The elevator arrived. Ding. The heavy doors rumbled open. It was empty. I stared into the empty wood-paneled box. I could smell it, that faint chemical smell. "This isn't happening," I whispered. I walked over cautiously. I looked inside. Empty. I hit the B button and sent it back down. The doors closed and it rumbled away. I was spooked. I was really spooked. At 3 a.m. it was time for my second patrol. This one included my least favorite task. I had to go into the anatomy lab, retrieve the red biohazard bags of non-human biological waste, mostly leftover preservative-soaked gauze and tubing from the cold storage, and take them to the incinerator chute. I dreaded it, but tonight, I was terrified. I took the main elevator down. The hallway flickered. I put my key in the lab door. Click. The motion sensor light came on. "Security," I mumbled, pushing the door open. The room was just as I'd left it. 8 covered tables. Bright lights. I walked quickly, trying not to look at the tables. I went to the walk-in cold storage, a heavy freezer-style door. I pulled the handle. It hissed open and a cloud of cold air rolled out. Inside, in a large red bin, were 3 tied-off biohazard bags. I grabbed them. As I was backing out, I heard a sound. Jerk. I froze. Jerk. Jerk. It was coming from the main lab. I stepped out of the cold storage. I looked. It was coming from one of the tables. The third one on the left. A small, dark puddle was forming on the white tile floor. Jerk. 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 A dark, oily fluid was leaking from under the blue vinyl tarp. My job was just to check the lock. My job was not to touch the tables. Never touch the tables. But what if a seal was broken? What if it was a leak? I had to look. I set the bags down. I walked over to the table, my stomach churning. The smell was different. Not just formaldehyde. It was metallic, like old pennies. "Okay," I whispered. Just a quick look." I grabbed the corner of the blue tarp. I lifted it. The table was empty. There was no cadaver. Just a bare, stainless steel table. And it was wet. The surface was covered in the dark, oily fluid. I was so confused. Where was the... I looked at the puddle on the floor. I looked at the wet table. I realized the sound. The drip. It wasn't coming from the table. It was coming from above the table. I looked up. Directly above the table was a large metal ventilation grate, and the fluid was dripping from the grate. As I watched, another dark drop formed, hung for a second, and fell, splatting onto the steel table. I stared at the grate. I saw something. In the darkness of the vent, behind the slits of the grate, 2 eyes. They were looking down at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. We just stared at each other. Then the grate moved. It wasn't screwed in. It was pushed aside with a scrape of metal, and something dropped. It landed slap on the wet steel table. On all fours. It was a man. Or it had been. He was pale, almost gray, emaciated. His ribs stood out like a skeleton's. He was wearing nothing but a pair of torn, filthy, orderly pants. His hair was long, matted. He crouched on the table, the oily fluid dripping from him. He looked at me, and he smiled. A wide, impossible grin showing teeth that were filed to points. I found my voice. I screamed. A high-pitched, horrible sound. I turned and ran. I heard him land on the tile floor behind me. A wet, heavy thud. I fumbled for the door. I could hear him behind me. Not running. Skittering. A fast, wet, crawling sound. I burst through the door into the hallway and didn't look back. I just ran. I heard the lab door slam open. I ran for the elevator. I hammered the button. I heard the skittering in the hall. The elevator was too slow. I ran for the stairs. I burst into the stairwell and started climbing, taking them 3 at a time. I heard him enter the stairwell. The slap, slap, slap of his hands and feet on the concrete. He was crawling up the wall. I screamed again, scrambling, falling up the stairs. I burst out into the main atrium, and I ran full speed through the glass front doors. I didn't even slow down. I hit the push bar and tumbled out onto the snowy pavement. A campus police car was pulling up. I just lay on the ground, sobbing and pointing at the building. They found the lab door open. They found the empty wet table. They found the open vent. They searched the whole building. They searched the ventilation system. They found a nest. In a maintenance crawl space accessible only from the anatomy lab's vent, they found a pile of old patient blankets, rotting food, and specimen jars. Dozens of them. All empty. They found scrapes and a trail of the oily black fluid all through the ventilation system, leading to every floor. He had been living in the walls. For how long? They never found him. I dropped out of the pre-med program. I transferred schools. I can't be in a hospital. I can't stand the smell of chemicals, and I never take the elevator. This job was the most boring job I've ever had, and I've worked in a call center. I was a night guard at the Riverside Corporate Park. It was one of those soulless suburban office parks. 3 identical 3-story glass and steel buildings, named Building A, Building B, and Building C. They were all connected by outdoor covered walkways. My post was at the main reception desk in the lobby of Building A. My job was to sit there from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. and watch a monitor bank. The buildings were completely dead after 6 p.m. The only things that moved were the cleaning crews, and they were gone by 10. My only company really was the lights. The whole park was run on motion sensor lights to save energy. If you stood still for more than 5 minutes, the lights in that section would click off. When you walked, they'd click on ahead of you. It was efficient, and as I would find out, terrifying. For the first few months, the job was a dream. I got paid to binge watch shows on my laptop. This night in late October was different. It was a still, clear night. No wind, no rain. Around 2:30 a.m., I was dozing at my desk. Click. The sound came from the monitor bank speaker. I looked up. On the screen for Building C, 2nd floor, a light had turned on. It was in the middle of the sales department's cubicle farm. I watched it. The buildings were old enough that sometimes things happened. A draft, a mouse. Click. The next light in the row clicked on. I sat up. Click. The next one. It was like someone was walking. A slow, steady walk. Click, click, click. The lights lit up, one after another, in a perfectly straight line, moving down the main hallway of Building C. "What the hell?" I whispered. The sequence of lights reached the stairwell and clicked off. Silence. I watched the monitor for the stairwell. Nothing. Then, click. The monitor for Building C's lobby lit up. Someone, or something, had walked down the hall, taken the stairs, and was now in the lobby. But the camera showed nothing. Just the empty lobby, now brightly lit. I grabbed the phone and called my supervisor. He sighed. I could tell I'd woken him up. "Oh yeah," he said, "that's Building C. The sensors in C are junk. They do that all the time. It's a known glitch. Something with the wiring. Just ignore it." I looked at the monitor. It looked like a person. "Yeah, it does that," he said. "Freaked me out the first time too. Just a big, spooky coincidence. Go back to your show." He hung up. A glitch. Okay. A wiring fault. I watched. The lights in C's lobby stayed on for 5 minutes, then clicked off. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. A glitch. I went back to my laptop. At 3 a.m. Click. I looked up. Not Building C. Building B. 2nd floor. The light at the far end clicked on. "No," I whispered. Click. The next light. Click. The next. It was doing the exact same thing. In the exact same pattern. A straight line moving down the hallway of Building B at the same steady pace. Click, click, click. It reached the stairwell. The lights went out. A second later, click. The lobby of Building B lit up. This wasn't a glitch. This was a pattern. It had gone through C. Now it was going through B. And I was in A. My blood was ice. It was coming here. I looked away from the monitors. I looked at my building. I was in the lobby of Building A. I looked up at the atrium. I could see the 2nd floor hallway from my desk. It was dark. I looked at the monitor for my own 2nd floor. Dark. I waited. My heart was a drum. 3:15 a.m. Click. The sound was soft. It wasn't from the speaker. It was from upstairs. I looked up. At the far end of the 2nd floor hallway, a single light had clicked on. I wasn't watching the monitor anymore. I was listening. Click. Fainter. Further away as it turned the corner. Click. A little closer. Click. It was in the main hallway now. Coming toward the atrium. Coming toward the stairs. Click, click, click. It was getting closer. Click. It was at the stairwell. The lights in the hall went dark. I didn't wait. I grabbed my phone, slid off my chair, and crawled under the solid, oak-faced reception desk. It was a big U-shaped desk. I wedged myself into the darkest corner, my back against the wall. I waited. Silence. Just the low hum of my computer. 1 minute. 2. Maybe it stopped? Click. The sound was right above me. The main atrium light. The big, powerful light right over my desk. Clicked on. I put my hand over my mouth. I was shaking. I heard nothing. No footsteps. No breathing. If it was a person, why were they so quiet? The lights, they're motion sensors. If you stand still, they go out. I waited. Under the desk. 4 or 5 full minutes. The atrium light stayed on. It was still moving, but I couldn't hear it. Then something dropped onto the desk. A drip. I heard it land on my keyboard. Drip. I risked a look. I peeked through the small gap between the desk and the computer tower. A single wet leaf was on my keyboard. Drip. Another. Then a shadow. Someone was on the desk. They were crouched on all fours on top of my desk under the bright atrium light. I could just see their shape. They were soaking wet, covered in leaves and mud, as if they had just crawled out of the river that ran behind the corporate park. They were perfectly still, just crouching. And then they moved. They bent their head down. Slowly, they lowered their head over the edge of the desk, upside down, to look at me. It wasn't a person. The face was human, but it was wrong. It was deathly pale, bloated, and waterlogged. The hair was matted with river gunk, and the eyes, they were black, completely, totally black. No white, no iris, just two polished black orbs. It smiled, a wide, wet grin. I didn't scream. I just moved. I scrambled backwards, kicking the desk chair away. I slammed my back into the wall, and I felt the handle for the security office door. I twisted it, fell backwards into the small, dark room, and slammed the door. I hit the deadbolt. I sat there in the pitch black, my heart exploding. I could hear it out there. It hopped off the desk. A heavy, wet thud on the lobby floor. And then silence. I sat there for an hour, maybe two. I didn't move. Finally, click. The atrium light went out. I waited. Another hour. The sun was starting to come up. The gray morning light was filtering in. I was still in that closet. At 7 a.m., I heard the cleaning crew arrive. I heard them exclaim. I finally opened the door. The lobby was a mess. Wet, muddy, leaf-strewn footprints were everywhere. They were on the floor. They were on the walls. They were on the ceiling. A perfect trail of wet, muddy footprints. It started at the back door of Building C. It went up the stairs. It crossed the hall. It went down the lobby. It went out the front door. It crossed the lawn to Building B. It went in Building B, up the stairs, down the hall, out the front door. It crossed the lawn to my building. It came in the front door. The trail of wet, muddy prints walked across the lobby, up the wall, across the ceiling, and stopped right above my desk. The trail ended in a big muddy puddle on the ceiling. There were no prints leaving. The police were baffled. They called it vandalism, but I know what I saw. It didn't leave. It just waited for the lights to go out.